Yeah, perfect. Yeah, again, my name is Nathalie Podeszfinski. I use the pronouns she, her. And as Sarah said, I'm the project manager for Dimensions at the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. I have the great honor of collaborating with my wonderful colleagues on this panel, and it's a real pleasure to be here in person. The last time I was actually here in the UK was to meet the advanced HE staff to discuss the program, so it's great to be back in the UK. So before I go to the core of my presentation, I just want to give a bit of context of how the Canadian government works. So Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, or NSERC, is one of the three federal research granting agencies that funds post-secondary institutions in Canada. NSERC alone has a budget of approximately $1.3 billion Canadian. NSERC is an agency of the federal government and falls under the Department of Innovation, Sciences and Economic Development. So Dimensions is an initiative led by NSERC on behalf of the tri-agency, which also includes the Canadian Institute of Health Research and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. So today I've been asked to talk about how did we get here, what is Dimension, and what is the future for Dimensions. So the Government of Canada, as Karine explained a bit this morning, has put equity, diversity, and inclusion at the forefront of its policies since the arrival of Prime Minister Trudeau. The Government of Canada has established a federal anti-racism secretariat, which aims to coordinate federal action to address racism in all its forms. The Secretariat has developed an anti-racism strategy called Building a Foundation for Change, which was based on and what was heard during the National Committee engagement on racism. It also established the LGBTQ2 Secretariat, aiming to coordinate and organize the efforts to promote equity. More specifically to the agencies, the budget 2018 had many EDI initiatives, one of which was the adoption of the Athenos 1 program in Canada. All the programs emphasize work with the 4 designated groups under the Federal Employment Equity Act: women, Indigenous peoples, racialized groups, and people with a disability. But the program also addresses an additional group, which is the LGBTQ2+ community. So Dimensions is a pilot program that was officially launched in May 2019 to encourage and recognize commitments made by post-secondary institutions towards advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion in the research community. It consists of 2 parts, a charter of 8 principles, and a pilot program for post-secondary institutions seeking recognition for their efforts in increasing EDI in their environments. The Dimension Charter is a set of principles that, if followed and adopted, are intended to foster increased EDI within an institution. The Charter, as well as the program structure more generally, is the result of a co-development process, which I will talk a bit about shortly. The Charter was developed based on a cross-country consultations over the fall and winter of 2018 and 2019, with the ambition of making it uniquely adapted to the Canadian realities. You can find the Charter actually on NSERC's website. So, actually, we are now at 141 charter endorsements. We received a new one this week. And you can see there's diversity in the organization that have signed the charter, which it's funny because it was initially made for post-secondary institutions, but there's actually 10 federal departments that decided to sign the charter. So there are departments that does research, like Environment Canada, the Natural Research Council, but it was also signed by different organizations, as you can see, the 28. So it's been great. So the scope of Dimension is more comprehensive than any of the other programs. As mentioned a bit by Karine earlier, it includes 5 deserving groups, all faculties and all types of post-secondary institutions, which we believe makes the program design uniquely complex and uniquely ambitious, but that will have more impact for the benefit of the community. The overarching objective is to foster transformational change within the research ecosystem across Canadian post-secondary institutions by identifying and eliminating obstacles and inequities. More specifically, the objectives of Dimensions are to create a culture of critical self-reflection related to EDI, support evidence-based EDI work using both quantitative and quantitative data, address the key challenges that present barriers to everyone's research career progression, and foster a community of practice that shares promises, practices, and resources. During the early part of the pilot, post-secondary institutions were invited to apply to be part of the pilot cohort to participate in the co-development of the recognition part of the program. 17 institutions out of 40 were selected using a peer review process. As you can see from the image here, and for those who don't necessarily know a lot about Canada, we actually cover all provinces except Newfoundland and Labrador, which is the furthest province to the right. Little reminder, Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories. And education in Canada actually falls under the jurisdictions of provincial and territorial governments. Therefore, Dimension focuses on research, an area where the federal government has some leverage since we are funding many projects and initiatives. The cohort has a variety of small, medium, and large institutions, and there is a mix of colleges and university. There's also a variety with respect to each institution's EDI readiness, meaning not all institutions are at the same stage of their EDI journey. So the Dimensions pilot program is inspired by and somewhat modeled on Athena's One, but has gone some significant changes. Since Dimensions has a broader scope, we decided to go with a co-development approach to create the various components of the Dimensions program. A co-development approach means that the cohort institutions are actively participating in the development of all Dimensions material documentation, including the handbook, the framework for assessing EDI work done by institution, as well as the review process used to assess applications. The development process has included cohort working groups, events to share promises, practices, and workshops provided by EDI experts. The co-development approach has also included broad consultation on the development of the charter. So this approach has included a lot of work for pilot institutions in the cohort. A lot of energy and time from representatives of these institutions has been invested in this process, for which we are very grateful. An additional goal of the Dimensions pilot is to help create an EDI community of practice for the sector that promotes collaboration and the sharing of resources, strategies, and promising practices. Since the institutions build the program with us, it reflects their realities, and we hope that the other post-secondary institutions in Canada will see themselves reflected in the program literature and requirements. To give you a sense of the co-development process, here are some of the examples of the cohort participation. These working groups helped us build the different sections of the handbook and other related aspects of the program. There are different elements of the program designed for which consensus was reached over the last months. The first big one, I think, is that the cohort decided not to follow the same award system as Athena's One, which means that we will not use the levels of bronze, silver, and gold. Since the start of the program, the hierarchical aspect of the bronze, silver, and gold was rejected by participants in the consultations. They believe that this will better represent Canadian values, and Dimension should not be perceived as a competition between institutions. It should be considered as a collaborative endeavor among institutions and the community of practice. So these are the 4, and we decided to have 4 stages of recognition that you can see on the screen. So there are different principles of the program design for which consensus was also reached during the co-development process. Institutions, depending on the recognition stage they are applying, will be expected to engage meaningfully with all of the 5 groups named in the Dimensions program, including appropriate disaggregation and intersectional analysis. They will plan and conduct a demographic review of members of the research community, plan or undertake a climate assessment that is designed to generate insight into the experiences of marginalized members of the research community, drawing both existing and new engagement with community members. And conduct an environmental scan to examine policies, practices, and procedures that impact EDI in the institutions. The voices are at the center of the program, and I'll come back a bit later. They should practice mutuality and cooperation because it reinforces that an institution's EDI commitment is not just to itself, but to the improvement of the research ecosystem as a whole and to any other institution that could benefit from its alliance. Institutions will be recognized for sharing with one another practices and tools, analysis and interventions that were successful or unsuccessful. And that the evaluation should be context-specific, and I'll come back to that point also. So institutions are expected to address experiences of racism, gender discrimination, homo and transphobia, ableism, and other harms within their communities. A key strategy for doing so begins with gathering evidence, engagement-based evidence, which emphasize the centrality of the voices of the impacted by histories and continuing experiences of inequity, exclusion, and injustice in post-secondary institutions. The voices should be at the central of the application process, and that the community should be informed of the progress through various means, such as town halls, e-bulletins, and that the communication strategy of the institution should always include engagement with both internal and external stakeholders. With an emphasis on building evidence that provides not only numerical but an experiential picture, quantitative and qualitative tools should be employed with the goal of telling the story, drawn from the institution research community. The data that is collected should be gathered with an eye toward demonstrating the 5 types of evidence that we'll mention later. As stated in the Dimensions Charter, institutions require qualitative and quantitative data to measure, monitor, understand, and publicly report on challenges and progress made. As we are actually discussing here during 2 days, data collection is essential to measure the effectiveness of interventions and provides several benefits to EDI work. Without data, institutions don't have the benchmark to know if the realities of the groups have changed or not over the years. The information should be gathered to respond to these 5 types of evidence in their application. The evidence of motivation, evidence of gaps and needs, assets and obstacles, evidence of commitment, and evidence of change from the institution. But it should all be done to keep in mind the context in which an institution is operating in. The Dimensions program aims to be inclusive to institutions of various type, sizes, and location. And also a firm understanding of historical, cultural, and geographical factors is key, including elements such as high populations of first-generation students, immigrants, international students, and members of official languages minority communities. So the inclusive assessment approach has been created using an inclusive by design process. It guides the framework of the dimensions recognition, and institutions should always have this in mind while developing their application. The program aims to take a holistic approach to EDI work, and throughout the process, we are emphasizing that EDI is part of research excellence. So these are some of the challenges faced by institutions that entered in the Dimensions pilot. The scope of Dimensions can actually be daunting. Many institutions feel they need to look at all aspects of their structure, and which can be very significant for many. As Karine mentioned this morning also, the federal government has many initiatives in terms of EDI, so it's hard to find and to put together the different action plan needed for our different programs. Also, COVID-19 has impacted a lot of our institutions, and I'm sure it's the same for you in the UK. Also, since dimension is, as I said earlier, is one of many, we're always going back to the same people, so actually taxing the groups that we don't want to tax. And that the collection of data in Canada is not standardized by many universities, and that's why we're working with Statistic Canada to try to find a data collection system that would be common to all institutions. But there's good opportunities for Dimensions and other similar programs as the one we are talking today, is that institutions really enjoy the fact that they can share some of their practices with their colleagues. As one of the members of our program design expert committee said in a recent article, it's interesting to see what is being done better elsewhere as it helps us adjusting certain practices. And another institution said, even if we are evolving in different contexts, we face actually very similar challenges. So I think I'm going to stop there since our presentation are going to be shared in So technically I'm just going to say that our evaluation of our first applications, the deadline is September 1st for institutions to send their application, which we're going to evaluate this fall. So we should have award winners or recognitions winner, we don't like to say the word awards in Canada, in winter 2023. Thank you.